Chapter 9. Masked Intruders. For the next few minutes there was near pandemonium in Mr. Drew's study. Mr. Cough and the Fontaines were speaking in Centrovian at the top of their voices, eyes flashing and hands waving. As Nancy and her father stood helplessly by, Ned Nickerson, Hannah, and George rushed in. "I knew there'd be trouble. I just knew it," Hannah cried. By the sound of the Centrovians' excited voices, the onlookers fully expected Cough and Henri to come to blows. To their amazement, nothing of the sort happened. But when Mr. Drew caught the word Judson, he stepped forward and took Henri by the shoulder. "Please speak in English," he said. The young man looked shamefaced. He bowed slightly and said, "I beg your pardon, sir. We Centrovians are excitable people. I assure you that we were saying nothing which you should not hear." The interruption quieted the three Centrovians. Hélène and Mr. Cough also apologized, explaining that they were talking about conditions in Centrovia. Cough had learned from the underground that the brother and sister were in grave danger. Henri also had mentioned Nancy's suspicions about the Judsons. Hélène and Henri, who had overheard part of their countrymen's conversation with the Drews, had not been able to remain in hiding when they heard Mr. Cough mention their names. Nancy addressed herself to the Fontaines. She asked them frankly, "Do you want to tell Mr. Cough your whole story?" "Oh, yes," Henri replied. From an inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out the warning note that had been left at the dancing school and showed it to the caller. After reading it, Mr. Cough remarked, "This just proves what I've been telling the Provacks, that they are in danger." "We thought you sent that note," George blurted out. "Me?" Cough exclaimed. Then he smiled at George. "Is that why you've been trailing me?" She admitted that it was. "Well, I'm glad we're getting things straightened out," said Cough. "And now I must go." He turned to Mr. Drew. "You will still take my case against Mr. Judson?" The lawyer nodded, then said, "Since I may handle your case, there are a few things I would like you to do. For one, everything which took place in this house tonight must be kept in strictest confidence." Cough nodded. "Also," Mr. Drew went on, "I see no reason for your hiding. If you wish to move back to the Claymore Hotel, I think it will simplify matters. It might bring Mr. Judson into the open, and I should like to meet him very much." "My daughter and I will come back to River Heights tomorrow," Mr. Cough promised. "I know Millie will be pleased. She can resume her part in the charity performance." Nancy smiled. "Mrs. Parsons will be glad to hear it. I'll tell her." The Centrovian said goodnight and left the house. The others sat down to discuss this newest development in the mystery. "I just can't make my mind up about that man," George said flatly. "One minute I trust him, and the next I don't." The Fontaines were confused by this observation. They trusted the man implicitly. Mr. Drew and Nancy said that they felt a bit wary about Mr. Cough. Undercover agents were very clever. Hélène and Henri admitted that perhaps they had told too much. "Oh, what shall we do?" Hélène cried nervously. Nancy had a ready answer. "I believe we should move you to another place." "We'll go," said Henri. "But where? We seem to cause trouble for ourselves and everyone else wherever we are." At this point, Ned spoke up. "I know the ideal spot for you. None of your enemies would ever think of it. My family owns a little place on Cedar Lake that they're not using right now. I'm sure my parents would be glad to have you live there." "That's an excellent idea," Nancy declared. "Ned, Find out about it right away, will you?" He telephoned his mother at once. When Ned explained the situation, Mrs. Nickerson said she would be very happy to have the Fontaines use the cottage. "It's all settled," he announced, coming back to the group. "When would you like to go?" Nancy answered the question by saying she thought the Fontaines should leave immediately. She suggested that they pack their clothes while she and Hannah filled some cartons with food for them to take along. Secretly, Nancy and George were amused at Hannah's reaction to the whole episode. She seemed delighted to have her guests leave, and with Nancy's help, packed a large quantity of food. Ned pulled his car into the driveway and parked near the back door. Suitcases and cartons were stowed in the trunk. Then the Fontaines stepped into the rear seat and crouched down. Ned and Nancy climbed into the front. As soon as they had gone, Mr. Drew got out his car and drove George home. He had just returned and was taking off his coat when the telephone rang. Hannah, on her way to the living room, heard him say, "I'll be there as soon as I can make it." As he replaced the receiver, Hannah said, "Are you going out?" "Yes, Hannah. The call was from Mr. Koff. He has received a good lead in connection with his case and wants me to join him in New York. He is just leaving by plane and I'm to meet him there. I'll take the next plane. It leaves in about an hour." After the lawyer had left the house, Hannah sat down in the living room to read. About 10 minutes had gone by when she heard footsteps on the front porch. Nancy and Ned, she thought. Oh dear. Something must have happened and they couldn't continue to the lake. Knowing that Nancy had a key, Hannah did not get up. But a moment later, when the bell rang, she thought that Nancy must have forgotten her key. "Well, I can't blame her with all the things she has on her mind," the housekeeper said to herself. She rose and walked to the door. As she opened it, Hannah Gruen froze to the spot. A man and woman wearing masks stood there. They rushed inside, slammed the door shut, and the man said gruffly with a French accent, "There is nothing to fear if you will do as we say. Where are the Fontaines?" Hannah shuddered. Then she gained control of herself and said bravely, "You're making a serious mistake. This is the Drew residence. There's no one here by the name of Fontaine." "We happen to know differently," the woman declared. She spoke without accent in a nasal tone. At this moment, there was an unexpected interruption. Togo, Nancy's terrier, rushed in from the kitchen and leaped at the man. In a lightning-like move, the masked stranger threw the dog to the floor, pulled a drape from the hall window, and quickly wrapped the terrier in it. Hannah now sprang into action. "Get out of here, both of you!" she shouted, and moved backward toward the telephone. The intruders apparently guessed what was in the housekeeper's mind. Roughly, the man grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her into the living room. He glanced around, then said to his companion, "Go find some rope." The woman disappeared toward the kitchen. Hannah could hear her opening and slamming drawers. Finally, she came back with a roll of clothesline. Quickly, Hannah was bound to a chair. Then the couple disappeared up the stairway. Apparently, they were making a thorough search of the residence because Hannah heard them going to the 3rd floor. Satisfied that the Fontaines were not hiding in the Drew residence, the masked strangers came storming down the stairs. The man entered the living room and stood before Hannah Gruen. Glaring at her and shaking his fist, he cried out, "You tell us where Hélène and Henri Fontaine are, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." End of chapter 9.